Welcome to the Landscape Chronicles, the podcast dedicated to the businesses and the people driving innovation in the green industry. Join us as we spotlight the companies making an impact and sit down with industry leaders who have transformed their humble beginnings into successful enterprises. Get ready for an inside look at the companies and pioneers shaping the future. Here's the host of the Landscape Chronicles, Stephen Gault.
I'm excited to introduce today's guest, Mr. Chris Gentry from Charleston, South Carolina. Chris is the founder of MyServiceArea. MyServiceArea is a territory mapping tool for service businesses, and he's also the owner of HappyCans, Charleston's oldest trash can cleaning service. We'll talk the roots of his journey and dig into how MyServiceArea is changing the game when it comes to route density. So without further ado, thank you for being on the show, sir.
Thank you, Stephen. Glad to be here.
You've got a pretty extensive background, and it looks like you've had your hands in quite a few things over the years. You've since landed on something that's a game changer for service businesses. But before we dig into that, talk to me about where it all began.
That's a great question. How much time do we have? It all began a long time ago. I caught the entrepreneurial bug back in the 5th, 6th grade. I'm going to date myself here a little bit, but I had a paper route on a bicycle. And I did that and cut grass in the neighborhood. And on one of the houses we used to live in, there was a golf course on the other side of the ravine or other side of the river. And when they would close off the dam and let the water level drop, we'd go over there on one of these par threes that you had to hit over the water. We'd go collect golf balls in those 5-gallon buckets and sell them back to the clubhouse. That's where I think it all began in the 4th, 5th grade, somewhere around there, that the entrepreneurial bug got me, and it's been with me ever since. And so I've done a lot of things to get here to where I am today.
I actually did the same thing. I grew up on a golf course, and I can remember going to a few of the holes where all the old men would hit the balls into the water. So me and my brother would go into the golf course ponds at night, and we would just kind of feel around with our toes in the mud until we would feel the golf balls, and we would throw them up on the fairway, and then we'd gather them all in our bags, and we'd bring them home and we'd clean them, and then we would go out on a Saturday or Sunday morning and set up on one of the tee boxes, a little table, and basically sell the golf balls back to the guys that hit them in the water.
And what's so funny is when you're a young kid, the older kids in the neighborhood that you hang around with and play around with, you listen to them. Well, one of the older kids that was in high school, he said, "You guys know what golf ball hawking is?" And we were like, "No, this is how this whole thing started." And he said, "Well, the whole whatever, number 7 that goes along the river, when the guys hit their balls up there, you go up there and grab their balls. And that's how that's what you call golf ball hawking." And so we took him at his word. And that's our first experience, trying to get the balls. And so me and Jeff Schindel, I'll never forget his name. We went down there and this foursome was coming up. They hit their balls on the green. We ran up there, we grabbed their balls and jumped back in the water and hid under the bank. And they came looking for us and they could never find us, even though they were standing right above us. The river washes out the bank and we were underneath it. And we were so proud of ourselves. We went back and told, the older guys, "We did what you told us to do. No, how do we go sell these things?" And they were like, you silly kid.
So you kicked off your career selling golf balls. What happened after that?
Always cutting grass. I mean, that was a common job that I had, throughout middle school and then high school. I actually cropped tobacco one year, actually my senior year. I'm originally from North Carolina and Eastern North Carolina, which is, tobacco country. But as far as doing my own thing, the next big venture was owning a restaurant. I dropped out of college after my junior year and opened a coffee and smoothie bar. I was ahead of my time and quickly learned about 6 months in that I needed 6 to 8 months in that I needed to build a kitchen. So built the kitchen and started doing breakfast and lunch and turned it into a little cafe and had that for 3.5 years and sold it. And then went to work in the automotive world because one of the guys that worked for me, his stepdad was in the automotive parts and wholesale, mainly mufflers and tailpipes and such. And worked for him for 3 years and then got into the software business down here in Charleston. And that's where I fell in love with software. And it was in the corporate world for a while. Owned a vending machine business, owned a photo booth business, which you'd be shocked. That was a great business. I was able to sell both of those businesses, but the photo booth business, I was early on because Charleston is a huge wedding destination. And this is before photographers actually, offered a photo booth. So I was up to 3 photo booths and booking them out 2 or 3 nights a weekend. And that business was a 6-figure business, believe it or not. Sold the vending machine business. I sold that business. I sold the restaurant. And then my punch to the gut was I started a texting software program and had that way too long and lost a lot of money in that one. That was my huge fail, huge learning experience.
Yeah. I think we've all had them. I had a video production business at one point. My first major job out of college on Walker, Texas Ranger. I didn't want to give up the business. So we started a video production company. And just like you said, I held on to it for far too long. And being able to let go is a superpower, right?
Will you think that next customer or that next, well, in my head with the software was, my next customer, the next functionality piece is what's going to be your game changer, right? That's the one that's going to open up the golden gate and just let all the customers file on through, but that wasn't the case. And plus that was a partnership and, it wasn't the best partnership in the world.
Okay. So that business folded. You eventually had the courage to just say, all right, I've had enough and you're out. So what then?
I mean, in between those, I was working for another a small software company here in town. And I actually left that company to do this texting. And then after the texting company, a gentleman that had used our texting software actually started HappyCans. And so I became friends with him. He started HappyCans a long time ago. He also bought into the Duty Calls franchise, the poop scooping here in Charleston. And that started to take off for him. So he said, I can't run 2 service businesses, and Duty Calls has just skyrocketed and HappyCans is sitting there. So he sold it to a young man here in town who thought it would be cool to be his own business owner. And 9 months later, he was like, I'm not cut out to be a business owner. And Kyle had told me about, and his name was Chris too, that Chris was looking to sell HappyCans. And so that's how I found out about that business. I looked at the business, I looked at the numbers and realized that there was a big opportunity. And so I've owned that business now for a little over 4 years.
It's a fascinating business. It seems like you've had a pretty good deal of success with HappyCans. Give me a little rundown on the progression of where your business started and where it is now.
I bought HappyCans. It was right at the beginning of COVID. And he had about 250 or 275 customers. So my game plan moving into that, after I took ownership of it was, I'm not going to change anything for 90 days with the one exception of the one-time cleans. The way that he had HappyCan structured, he offered all different types of frequencies for cleaning. And it was just way too much. But I kept it the same for 90 days to understand what was going on in the business. And I also tracked my miles. And that's where I got punched in the gut. Or I shouldn't say that. I had my VA moment that leads into MyServiceArea. But so for 90 days, I was just going through learning the business and understanding what was going on. There were days that I was traveling over 100 miles. I was losing money. Also, he was only charging $10 a can. That's the quickest way to go broke. After realizing that I would have to come home and look up every address that I would get these requests because, HappyCans has strong domain presence when it comes to SEO. So if you look up trash can cleaning in Charleston, we're either number one or number two. My goal for this business was to create route density in these neighborhoods that already had 10 customers or more. And so that's where I was able to fire, after implementing my service area, I fired about like 60 or 70 customers. I just wasn't making any money. And I also went up on my pricing. I try to go up on my pricing every year. And so I just went up on my quarterly pricing this month. I'm a little early, but my request this year for quarterly service has gone up. So I like, well, I need to bump up the pricing for that because I wish every customer was quarterly service, to be quite honest, because you're doing less wear and tear, less fuel. Your ROI on the stop is much higher. Now, your insurance is going to stay the same, but you're making more profit on those stops than you are in monthly.
Who is your primary target audience for Happy Cans?
If I had my best guess, I would probably say that household income is 250 and higher. Probably 75% of the inquiries come from the women. And I said, you always have that husband though that calls up and goes, I need to get my wife off my back. I got to get these trash cans clean. I don't want to clean them. Come clean my trash cans. So you've got those guys. And so, it's families, like I said, $250,000 probably plus household income. That's my target demographics.
Got it. So from a marketing standpoint, how do you go after those new customers in those areas?
So, I'm glad you're sitting down for this, but I have consistently grown this business year over year. And I'll tell you right now, I have been closed 4 weeks out of this year, out of 2024, for multiple reasons. And I am 11% year to date higher than I was last year this time. And I've spent $0.0 on marketing.
So how are you doing it?
So I find my champions in these neighborhoods. So whether it's Lisa or Steve or Lucy, I find those champions in that neighborhood and I'll say, hey, Lisa, can you do me a favor? Can you make a post and I'm going to email you the link? You just have to copy and paste it. That's all in your Facebook neighborhood group. Can you do that a couple times a year for me? Sure. No problem, Chris. We're happy. No pun intended.
Are there other service lines that you have as well?
I do. Pressure washing is a natural fit because you've got all that equipment. And so we do that. Like I was telling you earlier, I started subbing that work out last year. And then last year we did Christmas lights, trying to follow you lawn care guys. So I only market to both the pressure washing and the Christmas lights. I think I only sent out an email communication to about 100 of my customers that I knew that would probably, be interested in Christmas lights. And if my goal was, if I got 15 of them, that was a huge win for my first year. And I think we ended up at 7 or 8 customers. And I've already gotten some inquiries this year. So if we add a couple more, that'll be fantastic.
Let's fast forward a little bit here to MyServiceArea. You mentioned it when you first took on Happy Cans. You didn't have efficiency in your routes. You cut, I believe you said 60 customers after that first 90 days or whatever that first trial period was. I would assume that probably led you to your development and obviously your interest in software in the past to developing MyServiceArea. Give us a little bit of an origin story on MyServiceArea as far as what inspired you to create it. It sounds like I know what inspired you, but talk to me about what the early days were like.
When I was doing that 90-day test run with Happy Cans and trying to understand everything, I joined these Facebook groups for can cleaners. And I was like, hey guys, how are you filtering these requests? Because literally in the summertime, I was getting 10, 15 requests a day. Come clean my trash can. And I would literally, on one screen, I'd have Jobber up because I use Jobber. On the other screen, I'd have a map. And I'd look at the addresses and see where they were. And then if they were too far out, I'd have to take the time to respond to them and say, hey, John, sorry, we don't service your address. Try Clean Cans. When I was in these Facebook groups, I was like, what are people using to filter inquiries. And a lot of these guys said, use a zip code. And I was like, I can't use a zip code because I service pockets of these zip codes. I need something else. Well, that's probably your only option. And so I started looking around and looking around. I couldn't find anything where you could create a profitable service area on a Google map and filter it by that. And so that's where MyServiceArea was born. I found a developer to build it for me and I used it for myself. That's when I imported my information because anytime an address is entered into MSA, it drops a pin on the map and you can import your customers and you can see all the pins on your map. So after I had created my profitable service areas, and that's when I fired, the 60, 70 customers. People thought I was crazy. Like, how are you going to generate that revenue back? And I said, well, you have to understand that most of those people were costing me money. I wasn't making anything on these people. I was losing money. It didn't take long for me to recoup that customer base and make money. I shrunk my service area and grew top line revenue 32%. That's a lot of money. My goal is route density and it takes discipline. And saying no is hard as a small business owner. I had a problem. I needed a way to fix it. I couldn't find a way to fix it. So I had somebody build it for me. And then after I got it up and running and I was using it for 30 or 45 days, I posted in one of the bin cleaning groups. I was like, hey, built this tool. Does anybody want to use it for free? And so that's where it started off. And we gave it away for a year and a half.
How did it grow from there into what it's become?
It really kind of became a business when we had other people outside the bin cleaning world find us and say, hey, I need that tool. And that's when kind of the light bulb went off that said, wait a minute, if you're a home service business and you have to travel to see your customer, then this tool may be useful for you. It's not for every home service business because obviously ticket prices are higher. Like a roofing company probably wouldn't use MSA. An HVAC company probably wouldn't use MSA just because their ticket prices are so high. They're willing to travel further to service that customer. Where in the bin cleaning world, the lawn care world, the pest control world, those tickets typically sub $150 for regular service. And so you're more mindful of that windshield time, especially if you have employees. That's really where we're like, wow, let's start talking to other home service businesses. A real focus was on lawn care because we started talking to lawn care people. And lawn care businesses were like, my average ticket's $55 for lawn maintenance. I can't afford to travel 45 minutes one way and 45 minutes back to service that lawn every week. But yet I get these inquiries and I'm not going to service that area. So what is something that I can use to streamline that process and automatically say no for me? That's where MSA comes into play and solves a problem.
Walk me through how it works. From what I gather, for those that might be listening, what does it look like on someone's website, right? So it is a plugin or an application, a separate application that a service business can add to their website. What does it look like from the end user experience?
Great question. So if you have a WordPress site, it's a plugin. If you have another site like a Squarespace or Wix or a custom, it's a line of code that you add. And so what we do is we give our users, our customers, the ability to attach the MSA window to buttons like get a free quote, request service, buy now, get a free estimate, what have you. Or it can hover over forms, however you see fit, you want it to interact or be a part of your website. That's what we can do. And so for the website visitor, when they come to your website and they are looking at your services, they click on a button, the window pops up, the MSA window pops up and says, let's be mindful of your time and make sure we service your address first. Because what's worse than answering 5 or 10 questions? I say 10 because in the bin cleaning world, we have to ask many more questions than you guys do in the lawn care world. But still, if you're that person and you have to answer those questions and then click submit and then wait on a response, only to find out that business doesn't service your address. And that's not good customer service. So why not tell them up front that unfortunately we don't service your address, but ask them for their information because you can follow up with them. Something big that we learned from lawn care from you guys is that you guys offer different services, have different pricing points, different profit margins. So, weed and fertilization, you guys are willing to travel further for weed and fertilization because there's a higher return on investment or profit margin than there is for lawn maintenance. So if somebody's on your site and selects lawn maintenance, that service area may be much smaller. But if they clicked on weed and fertilization and entered in their address, that zone may be very big where they would fall into it, but they wouldn't qualify for lawn maintenance because they're just too far out.
Got it. Is there a back end program or an application that I can go in to set things up?
Yeah, there is. So you've got a dashboard, you've got a contacts page, you got a map page, and the map page is where you build out your service areas or your zones. You just create a polygon on the map and you can go down to the street level. Case in point, one of our largest customers out in California, he's out in the San Francisco area. He runs, I think he's up to 9 trucks now, and he probably filters over 100 inquiries a day. He had a very bad experience on this one little cul-de-sac with some people there. So he went in his map and cut out that cul-de-sac. So anybody in that cul-de-sac that tried to get his service wouldn't get his service. They wouldn't get through.
Unless they called you directly.
Hey, that's a great point. So let's say you're a large enough organization, like we do have some lawn care customers that actually have staff and office staff. And so when somebody calls in, the first thing they do is they ask for the address, and they're on the map page within MSA, and it has address. There's an address lookup button. They click on that, they type in the address, and now they can drop a pin and they can see where the actual pin drops. They can easily and quickly tell that person, yes, we service your address, or no, we don't.
Sounds like a big time saver. Who are some of the competitors that are in this space?
We really don't have a competitor per se. We are a simple widget that creates a ton of efficiency and value for you. Because looking at your map, I call them ghost zones, where you can create a zone around a neighborhood or an area or what have you, and you're thinking about growing in that area. You can create that zone and keep it inactive. So people that live in that zone won't get through, but it'll drop a pin on your map. And so if at the beginning of the year, if you want to create some of those and say, hey, we want to grow, but we don't know where to grow yet, because I don't know, and I could be completely wrong, but I don't know if there's a CRM out there that will give you the data visualization that we give as far as your inquiries, because you can import your information. But since MSA is the first line, it's the gatekeeper, and it captures that pin no matter what. If they are in territory or out of territory, you can capture that address. That address becomes extremely valuable on that map, because if you have that ghost territory or zone and you start seeing pins in there, you could do a direct mail piece to them and say, this is where we want to grow. You have very targeted, laser targeted marketing efforts.
Yeah, and I think one of the big challenges that we face, our business, Ecomo, is we get a tremendous amount of inquiries from outside of the areas that we service, particularly for the maintenance and enhancement teams, our mow crews. You mentioned it earlier. We do take projects that are farther away for the landscaping projects, the bigger stuff. But when it comes to the routine maintenance, we get a tremendous amount of inquiries from folks that we know we're not going to go out and see. And as a courtesy, we're contacting them or we're emailing them back, letting them know, hey, we're not quite working in your area yet, but we're going to keep your information on file. And there's a lot of kind of back end work that our admins are having to do on our end to capture this information, to respond. And it sounds to me like this is a tool that would just kind of eliminate all of that on the front end, right?
It does. You hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what it does. So you would no longer have to worry about looking up that address and responding in that way. where MSA would automatically capture that information and say no for you.
Okay. How long does it take to get it set up? So if I want to subscribe, get set up, how long does it take to add it to my website if I've got a WordPress website?
If you manage your own site, I mean, we can do it in 10 minutes, get the plugin installed, get it activated, get it verified. And then, the longest part of this whole process, and I tell this time and time again, and usually when we get on calls, people don't listen to me when it comes to making their territories. I say, listen, take your time making your territories. I get very nervous when we jump on a Zoom call and we're walking through and reviewing everything, and I see a lot of straight lines. I get very nervous because I know that they did not take their time. Because if you're doing straight lines, you're cutting neighborhoods in half. You may be saying yes to people you don't want to say yes to, and you may be saying no to people you want to say yes to. It's happened to me on a dead end road. I missed 4 or 5 houses. At the very end of it, I got a phone call saying, "Hey, Happy Cans, you literally service my neighbor. Actually, you service 2 of my neighbors, and it says you don't service my address." And I was like, "What?" I recognized the street, and I was like, "I know I service that street." So I went into my map, I drilled down, and sure enough, I did not drag the line far enough to include those people. And so that happens. And, sometimes when I get an email from a customer, they're like, "Hey, Chris, this address didn't get through." And they called me and I know I service this address. And the first question I ask is, did you double check your map? Did you take the time to actually create your zones and drill down to the street level? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. It's my mistake. Sorry.
I do want to ask you from a technical challenges perspective. We all know that no software is perfect and every software leaves something more to be desired. What are some of the challenges that you're facing as you continue to develop MyServiceArea?
I think it's from a functionality standpoint. And what I mean by that is new functionality. So as we continue to grow in the lawn care space, lawn care business owners offer different services. How do we make it easier for them to tie services to zones, maybe even collect more information? If they want to do a mailer, what's the easiest way for MSA to help with that? Because we have a handful of customers that will take their map and they'll bring it to their marketing meetings. And these are larger customers because they actually have the money to spend on outside marketing teams. And they'll print off their MSA maps or show it to them and say, "Hey, look, these are the areas where we got inquiries and we need to focus marketing on." So how do we add more value that could be even more helpful for those companies that are really to spend their marketing dollars wisely? When you have, I think we've filtered almost 140,000, or if not, maybe over 140,000 now, addresses. That's a lot of data. It could be a lot of useful data to our customers that are looking to grow their business. There's always challenges because you're dealing with third parties, though, right? We're dealing with Wix, we're dealing with Squarespace, we're dealing with Google. Google's API can be updated daily. We have to make sure that we follow that. Another thing is we are only using 2% of what Google offers with their APIs. And I make that 2% number up. I just know that there are a lot more things that we could do with maps that we're not doing that could possibly be more beneficial to our customer base. And another thing, I think we spoke about this, we have that referral functionality, and it's huge with the bin cleaners. And what it does is if somebody comes to your website and they enter in their address, and let's just say Happy Cans, MSA comes back and says, "Hey, look, unfortunately, Happy Cans doesn't service your address, but our friends over at Clean Cans do. Do you want to go to their website?" And it gives that customer the ability to just go directly to the other website. They don't have to re-enter in their address because MSA already knows that they're in that business's zone, and they can go there and request service, buy the service, what have you.
Okay, so capturing that information, you mentioned something earlier about potentially being able to send out mailers. Is that something that you were exploring from a development standpoint?
Right now, the way that it works is, like I mentioned before, every address that is entered into MSA, it's captured and displays in your log activity. So we give our users the ability to attach Google Sheets. So anytime that information is entered into MSA, it dumps that information into a Google Sheet. And so, especially when the name and address is captured and phone number is captured, that's helpful because I've referenced it before. But now you've got those addresses. So you've got the pins on the map, you've got those addresses, and you can filter by date. You can look at that information and see if there's any grouping in a neighborhood. Well, if there is, you can take those addresses and maybe it's somewhere you want to grow. Send them a mailer. You've got those addresses already in a file. Just go ahead and send it to them and say, hey, send them whatever template you have set up.
Yeah, because I think we're somewhat reluctant to do a really good job at organizing the inquiries that come in the door that we don't take because they're outside of our areas. So essentially, you're saying we can see anyone and everyone that is outside the area that puts in an inquiry and it's displayed on a map with little flags or pins, correct?
Exactly. Exactly. And each pin has its own little identification card or contact card. In that information, you can see even the address, the name, the phone number. You can mark them however you'd like to identify them.
What industry is the bulk of your subscribers?
So, bin cleaning still leading the way, but by a narrow margin. And then lawn care, then pest control. We've got some mosquito sprayers. We've got home remodeling business. It's kind of a hodgepodge when you think about who we work with.
And it's a subscription based service, correct?
Yeah, monthly subscription.
I'm curious about the lawn and landscape world because that's the world that I live in. Is that an area that you're seeing more growth recently? When you compare your verticals, where are you seeing the most growth?
That's where the most growth is. We've also been focusing on lawn and landscaping and weed and fertilization as well. It's a huge market, a lot of opportunity for growth there.
It's a simple tool, it's a widget. And this is a pre screening front end tool to save people time.
You see that request come through, you know it's in one of your zones, your profitable service areas. Going back to a statement I said earlier, all these conversations that I hear and posts that I see and other people talking about, it's about how do we price this? How do we price this? And they never talk about, well, where is this actual inquiry coming from? I just scratch my head. Naylor is like the OG of route density. And even though I think people have become numb to those two words, for the people that are small, route density should be your business strategy. How do I create route density, spend less time driving and more time production?
And I will mention that we've kind of made that mistake in our business when we were in the early years and growing. We were taking clients that were well outside of our service area because we believed wholeheartedly that obviously we had a great brand, but we just thought if we had boots in the ground in a certain neighborhood that was 20 or 30 minutes away from our traditional routes, that people were going to see our trucks and our vans, and then the phone would ring and we would just be able to build up our business and establish ourselves in this new area. And lo and behold, it didn't happen that way. And we continued to hang on to these clients for far too long as our route density continued to increase as we grew our business. We were able to drop those clients. I understand that pain, and I absolutely agree with you that route density is key, particularly when it comes to the maintenance and enhancement stuff, because windshield time is losing money. Let me ask you real quick about what sort of educational resources that you provide for folks that sign up with My Service Area.
It's funny that you asked that question. In the early days of my service area or MSA, it was like set it and forget it. And I was like, nobody engages in the system. When I would look at the user activity log, every once in a while, I was like, man, people don't log into MSA, but nobody's calling with issues or emailing issues. I'm like, what's going on? Then I started thinking about me using MSA, but obviously I'm the founder, so I look at it daily. But I was like, well, maybe it's doing its job and they just forget about it. They kind of set it up and forget about it. It's doing its job. Everything that it's supposed to do, it's doing. And so in the brainstorming, like, well, how do we get people engaged? So that's when we started doing the weekly email. So the weekly email was kind of like a recap email of you had this many in territory, this many out of territory, and it's kind of cross reference. Well, that led to some engagement with our customer base of, you know what, I would really like a reference, an easy to look at reference of who was out of territory and who was in territory. So I can just reference and see if we signed them up or not. So then we started doing a daily email if your account got any inquiries. Now we do the daily email that gives you a recap of the previous 24 hours. We send that to you every morning at 8 o'clock in the morning Eastern time, where you can look and say, oh, wow, I had this many inquiries, 2 were in, 3 were out. As far as educational tools, we don't do enough educating the customer base on how important route density is. As far as the system goes, we don't do enough, and I'm being just transparent, of how you can really leverage the map. And that map is so powerful. When you start collecting that information and you start seeing those pins, I was on one of these jobber boards and somebody asked something like, hey, can you see your inquiries? And I don't know if you're familiar with Jobber or not, but Jobber just drops these green pins. You have no idea who they are, if they're customer, non-customer, in territory, out of territory. They're just green pins. And so I took a snapshot of my HappyCans MSA and I said, is this something that you're talking about? And they're like, what system is that? It's MyServiceArea. It's the map. You can actually see what's going on in your service area. It's a mindset. At the end of the day, it's a mindset change, right? So many people, especially small business owners, are scared to say no. So scared to say no.
You're right. We were.
So was I. I think everybody's guilty of it. And that's why I say it takes discipline. The moment you have the confidence and the discipline to say no, your business will be better off. I have that conversation all the time. You've got to say no. You've got to say no. And new customers in the early days, and especially with these bin cleaners, oh, I need to go bigger. I need to go bigger. We have a bin cleaning customer that is covering 1,500 square miles with one truck. And I've told him, how can you have a territory this size and make money?
He's got a vision of something in the future. And speaking of that, I was going to ask you, what is your long-term vision for MSA?
I really want to work with more lawn care customers. I have had so much kindness and so much help from yourself, the Paul Jamesons and the Haylers. They have been so kind to me. And there is such a natural fit for what MSA does with lawn care. Some of these lawn care guys are 1 or 2 man shows, and a tool like this, instead of being on the lawnmower and answering the phone, trying to look up an address and zooming in and zooming out and seeing if they service that address or not, it just doesn't make sense to me. They could streamline so much. One of the things that we're kind of talking about, and I think we're going to include it in the weekly email because we still do that weekly email recap, is to tell these guys, hey, you had 100-page views this last week. Because I think a lot of business owners don't look at that at all. They're either running ads or their SEO is so good. And I think for the smaller guys, they're always asking, who builds the best website? Tell me somebody that can do my website for me, what have you. These are the guys that also don't care about Google Analytics. They care about business. But if they had something that said, oh, your website only got 25 views this week. Well, that will get the mind thinking that, man, maybe I should do something. This is very low. How can I improve my online presence? Do I have my Google profile? Do I have one? Do I have it up to date? Am I posting pictures there? It's little things like that. It's already information that is captured that we could share and say, hey, this is how many visitors you had to your website last week. And maybe that will be beneficial and valuable to the user. They don't have to go and hook up Google Analytics or anything. It's just there.
Right. I enjoy looking at the data. I spend a lot of time on SEO myself. I dive into that from many perspectives. I like to understand analytics and understand site paths, how people get through the site and how they landed there, how much time they spent on particular pages, and what brought them ultimately to the appointment request form to schedule an appointment from us, and what made them leave. I'm kind of a guru when it comes to things like that. So
you're the exception, not the rule.
Yeah, I am a little bit of an exception. It's just something I've always been fascinated with for a long, long time. More importantly, I think that it's great that you can offer a benefit like that to some folks that don't have a lot of website development experience and they don't know how to set up Google Analytics because it can be a little bit complex. I think that's one of the big benefits of what you have here with MSA. I know you'd mentioned you've got Paul Jameson's endorsement, you've got Naylor's endorsement. It can be a pretty easy platform to use. It's not going to be overwhelming. And I think that that's one of the things that's what scares a lot of people away. People prefer to use a simple CRM to track their lawn mowing routes and their lawn customers because they don't want something that's too complex because it can be overwhelming. I wouldn't overthink it too much because I think that if you begin to kind of get into that zone of too much development, you might start scaring some people away that like how easy and efficient it is to use.
Yeah, I agree with you. Blue collar workers, and I'm one myself, it's the tools that excite them, right? It's not the technology so much. And so that's always a barrier to overcome. But as more and more people, such as yourself and the other people out there that share information and interview people like me and get to share the story on the benefits and the value, it certainly helps for these guys to overcome their anxiety or whatever they have to say, all right, it's time to make and move and implement this. Of course, there'll be guys that are like, I've done it this way forever. It's worked. I'm not going to change it. That's just the way it is kind of across the board.
Thank you, first of all, for sharing that. Is there anything that you think that I've left out, any talking points as far as HappyCans or MSA that you want to share?
I'll go back to saying the importance of route density. It's extremely important, and don't be scared to say no.
That's a great point. MSA is a great tool. You guys have got a great business out there in South Carolina. Chris Gentry, I appreciate having you on the show tonight.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Good night.
Thanks for listening to The Landscape Chronicles, where we take you inside the lives of those who shape the lawn and landscape industry. Don't miss the next episode. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And while you're at it, help spread the word by leaving a rating and review.